It's 9 o'clock, and we'd like to call to order the May 1st, 2015 South Coast Air Quality Management Governing Board meeting. We have a quorum at the rostrum. We'd like our other board members who are in the building to join us here as soon as possible. We will open today's meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Board Member Cacchiotti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Please stand up and face the flag. And place your right hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any opening comments or concerns from my colleagues here on the board?
Yes,
Dr. Luong has something.
something.
Real brief, Mr. Chairman. I attended the Move LA conference on, Earth Day, the 22nd, and served on a panel, and the conversation was about the possibility of additional public transit funding for Los Angeles County, and there we go. Mr. Cacchiotti has the program with him. And we had staff there, which was nice, but I want to make everyone aware that it looks like, the best possibility of raising billions of dollars that could be invested in clean freight, which we're pursuing, and so this potential measure R2 that the organization Move LA has been promoting is something I think we need to pay particular attention to. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mitchell?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. I want to mention that as chair of the Legislative Committee, I was in Sacramento last week with our legislative staff, and the message we were delivering to our legislators was primarily that when we're looking at greenhouse gas reductions and the various pieces of legislation that are coming through that are requiring greenhouse gas reductions, that we also include in that reductions in criteria pollutants, that we couple those two things, because you can do both of them with the same kinds of measures and mechanisms. So that we'll keep working on that in Sacramento. I think that's a real important direction for us. The other thing I want to mention is that yesterday, and you've probably heard this on the news, Tesla announced a transformational change in the way we get energy. They have developed an appliance, I'll call it an appliance, that will sell for $3,500 that you can place on the wall in your home or garage. And it will, it's lithium-ion batteries that will store the solar energy that you, or any renewable source, but primarily solar, that you are getting from solar panels on your property. So we may see a day when nobody's on the grid. It's really an interesting new concept, and I've been trying to wrap my head around it since I saw it and heard it yesterday, and there will be a lot of more talk about it in the next few weeks, so I wanted to mention that as well.
It was an amazing announcement. Mayor Polito?
Yes, just three quick things. One, just on the Musk situation. Barry will recall this. With Chas Haba, we were trying to do this probably about 6 years ago. We actually had 3 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion batteries. We're trying to put it in the home. Couldn't quite get it going, but it's not a new concept. And we did do a few homes actually with storage. Also, another company that we supported some years ago, Balcom Energy Group, where they were doing the trucks that were clean out on the port, they're now doing big-time solar with this type of thing in homes, up to 250 kilowatt hours, so that larger residential applications can go off the grid. But the other thing I want to mention was simply that on May 11th, And I'm sorry, Supervisor Nelson is not here yet, but on May 11th in Orange County, we're going to have a very big day that's going to, I believe, step us towards a cleaner future and clean air. And that is that we're going to have the director of the Federal Transportation Administration with us at a press conference. And I'm not going to tell you everything about the press conference, but I'm going to tell you we're going to roll out the Orange County streetcar, which is really the red line coming back. And, we're going to start a first segment of 4.5 miles or so. It's a $300 million project. We are only the second project in the country that's going to be on a fast-forward track. And so that means that instead of going on smart starts and new starts, and I know that in Los Angeles, they're working a lot with the FTA. Well, this is a new category where they're going to try to fast forward things. And if we get that, I think we're going to be operational within about 2.5 to 3 years, and that'll just be the first line. Once we get that orange line in, we're going to go up and down Harbor Boulevard. We're going to connect with Los Angeles because Los Angeles is already coming down, through Whittier and La Habra and all that. Also, we have the PE right-of-way, the Old Pacific Electric right-of-way. This is what we're building on. We're stopping right now at Harbor, but if you follow that PE right-of-way, it goes up into the Green Line in Los Angeles. And so it's the dawning of a new day, and it's a clean air new day that we're doing. And so, anybody that, from staff or any board members that happen to be, in the area, you're very, very much invited. It's May 11th, and it's going to be very, very exciting.
Dr. Parker?
Yes, 2 weeks ago, we had our executive board meeting of the Fuel Cell Partnership here at SCAQMD headquarters. The board voted to elect me to be chairman itself of that partnership beginning in 2016. And also, I think I mentioned last time, but we can now say that it's been confirmed that the Mary will be the chairman itself of CARP, will be also on that executive committee. We also have one of the commissioners from the California Energy Commission, and that is the one that has given us, I think it's $60 million, Barry, to develop fuel cell stations. I think it's going to be a very important issue since we're talking about batteries. As we all know now, fuel cell cars is this infrastructure that is going to be built will allow us to now roll out, have the automobile manufacturers roll out these fuel cell cars, because people will be able to have places where they can be filled with hydrogen. Biggest drawback, one of the largest drawbacks had been that we had not had the approval of weights and measurements in order to measure the exact amount of hydrogen that would be dispensed so that it could be charged for. We are hoping to be able to develop this infrastructure in such a way that we're going to be asking many of the representatives from some of the refineries within our region in order to also become members, so that we can hopefully more rapidly roll out the infrastructure throughout California and maybe even throughout the United States, if we can do that. So I think with SCAQMD representative, the head of CARP, and one of the commissioners that is in charge of this area of the Energy Commission, is a very positive step going forward. And we can see some very positive things and good things happening in that regard for the future.
Thank you very much for those comments. Any other comments by any other board members? Then let's retire to the front of the rostrum to honor Dr. Elaine Chang. You know, 2 months in a row is killing me here. I can't believe you're leaving. You know, and I'm tired of telling these stories,
A new start.
but
Telling you one.
I don't know, I don't think I have a new one. Only person in this building who's heard this story is Elaine Chang. Here's the cards, you can have them. You want to read them?
No, I
No,
don't.
okay.
I learned better.
You're the only person in this building who's heard this story. I'm going to tell it for the other people. It was about 8 or 10 years ago that I was with the singer Barry Manilow, and we were kind of hanging out, and he told me that his mom was a single mother in Brooklyn, New York, and they lived with his grandfather, and he was 5 years old. And his grandfather took him into Manhattan to a studio where, for a quarter, you could make a recording.
Wow.
And his cousin's birthday was coming up. And so his grandfather said, I want you to sing happy birthday to your cousin. And he said, I was 5 years old. I never sang in my life. I didn't want to sing. But my grandfather made me sing. You remember me telling the story? Made him sing happy birthday. And every Saturday, from the time he was 5 years old until he was 15, his grandfather would take him into Manhattan and take him to that recording studio and make him sing. Well, when Barry Manilow was 19, he recorded his first professional album, and it became platinum in 3 weeks. 5 months after that, they booked Barry Manilow into Carnegie Hall, and the concert sold out in 7 minutes. And he said when he walked out on the stage, he got a standing ovation from all 9,000 people that filled Carnegie Hall. He said, but he was only looking for one face in the audience. And when his eyes locked on his grandfather's eyes, he knew exactly what his grandfather was thinking. His grandfather was thinking Carnegie Hall was only 3 blocks from that studio where he used to put those quarters in so Barry Manilow could record. So we know that some people have the ability to see talents in other people that they may not see in themselves. And I think that Dr. Wallerstein saw the talent in this woman and gave her the opportunity to serve not only this district, but the people of Riverside, San Bernardino, Los Angeles, and Orange County in a manner which has just been unbelievable. This woman is a star in her own category. Thank you, Elaine, for your work. You know, Dennis put his fingerprints on it already.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's just-
I can't believe this day is actually here. I'd like to first thank my colleagues. You make cleaning the air truly a teamwork. I also want to thank the stakeholders here. You make me stand on my toes all the time. But most importantly, I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Burr and board and Barry that you shield staff from the politics. You let us scientists be the scientists. You challenge us to think big, but you grounded us through your questions at committee and board meetings. And sometimes we move slower than you would like us to, and sometimes we didn't get it right the first time. But you allowed us to grow and to learn from our mistakes. I want to thank you all for this. And because of your leadership, you make this job so rewarding and satisfying. So I will going to miss this place. And for most of people, they retire and then come back to receive this award. And today is actually my last day. So if you will forgive me, I have a meeting to attend this morning. Thank you.
I love you. You're the best. You're the best. You're lucky. That's amazing. Right? That's great. Good luck. Not many people. We're on the consent calendar, and I have cards on item 2, 9, 15, and 16 by our friend Dr. Tom Williams. Are there any other items off the consent calendar that any of the board members would like to pull? Go ahead first.
Mr. Chair, I need to recuse myself from items involving contracts with those who may have made charitable contributions to my employer, the Coalition for Clean Air. Agenda item number 3, I'm recusing myself from agenda item number 3 because UPS is a potential source of income which is materially affected by this item. And on agenda item number 4, I'm recusing myself because clean energy is a potential source of income materially affected by this item. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to too.
All right, I will
Mr.
accept the
Chair.
motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Also, on number 4, I'm recusing myself because financial interest in clean energy, which materially affects this item. Also, on the foster children, we're going to emancipate it, working with Barry, thank you, and the board. I'd encourage our other municipalities to also look at hiring the emancipated youth. We're now doing this in the county of Los Angeles, challenging our 88 cities. We have about 30+ cities right now doing that, because these kids don't have an opportunity if we don't give it to them.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great program. Supervisor?
Yes, I'd like to pull item number 4 for comment.
I'm sorry?
Item number 4, I'd like to pull for
4,
comment.
got it. Okay, I'll take the consent calendars absent 2, 4, 9, 15, and 16.
Move approval, Mr. Chair.
Second. Any opposition? Hearing none, those items are approved. Item number 2. Mr. Williams, Dr. Williams? And since you're up there, why don't you just do 2, 9, 15, and 16 all at one time?
Yeah.
And
We'll
please
do
remove
it
your hat.
very quickly. 3 minutes.
Doc,
Please remove your hat.
Doc, could you remove your hat, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Too many lights.
Is the sun
Okay,
in your eyes?
for item 2, have at least 2 separate hearings for these 2 rules, because they are getting confused. One refers to activities that are covered by item 2, or the second part. So I'd highly recommend 2 separate hearings, maybe Culver City, Montebello, Torrance, Wilmington, and maybe even South LA, because these areas are being impacted right now by existing wells and proposed wells. Item 5, we're also gearing up for the AQMP 2016. And remember, your item 27, health, will be a central issue for us and how to regulate it. 15 and 16, the SR 710. Where's the rule for governing tunnel vents? Because right now, the DEIR that's being circulated and reviewed and commented on by your staff has two very large emission sources, one at the north end, one at the south end. And we have failed to be able to find out what the actual emission limits will be for those vent stacks. Is it a mobile source? Is it a stationary source? Seems like a stationary source. However, they are talking about meeting air quality requirements by, yes, scrubbing and dispersion. Oh, that's an interesting one. I haven't seen that one for something like 30 years. Dispersion in order to meet air quality standards? I don't know. Solution to pollution went out a long time ago, I think. So we're quite concerned about how this and future road tunnels will be incorporated also into the AQMP 2016. And we have a lot of issues with that one, especially related to the port. We see port traffic, we see rail opportunities, so there will be a lot of alternatives. So in the AQMP, make sure the purposes and needs are very well presented. Thank you.
All the items? Okay, why don't we then go to 16. I think that was all of them except four for you, Supervisor Benoit.
I'm sorry?
You wanted four?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Yeah, we got all the rest.
Thank you. On this item, it came to the technical committee, which I chair, and I asked some questions about the location of the existing public fueling stations. And I've been here now a couple of days. I didn't know we had one.
Really?
It's just not visible.
Yeah.
And in my experience, I relate that to my local public bus line, Sunline, which has been in the forefront of clean air for a long time, with the first all natural gas bus line in the country. We're not all natural gas now because about 4 of our vehicles are hydrogen. But all of those fuels are available at a very public-looking, street-facing facility that can be used by anybody. And true, if you own a CNG car, you can Google it and find it there or here. But the statement that's made there is, we support this. We want you to think about buying one of these vehicles. We have the fuel available for you here. And as we're getting ready to spend some money to upgrade a portion of our fueling system, I thought, is this a time to think about, I've never seen it. and I've had some people say, well, yes, but you can Google it if you own the car. Okay, that's good. But people driving by Sunline that don't own a hydrogen car might think about buying one, because I've seen where I can actually fuel that real close to home here. So I drove in today and took the time to try and find this public fueling station. There's a sign that looks to be about 2 foot square that has in a little block print that there's a public fueling station for these fuels here. And if you're not looking for it, you're not even going to see it. On the other hand, I saw the estimates that Dr. Wallerstein provided to me about how much it would cost to move the thing closer to the road, and after seeing where it's at, there's no need to do that. But I'm going to move that we approve this purchase of an upgraded CNG fuel station, but that we also take a very good look at creating some nice public inviting signage so that people driving by know that we support these kinds of fuels and they're readily available, at least right here. It may cost a couple bucks, but as I look at that street, I think that, and as a matter of fact, I looked at all our signs and we could all use an upgrade. Maybe you put it in a single contract. But I support, let's be public with the fact that we support these fuels a little better right here.
That's a great idea.
So with that, I'll move approval item 4.
Get a second?
I'll second.
Any opposition to that? It is approved. That concludes items 2, 9, 15, and 16.
I'll move it.
Second.
Any opposition? Hearing none, that is approved. Items 20 through 26.
Move it.
I think I had a request from Dr. Parker
I'd like to pull 21.
on 21, yes. Okay, we'll take it, we'll take 20 through 26 minus 21. We have a motion and a second.
Move approval. Second.
Any opposition? Hearing none. It is approved. Item 21.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask that the board consider us becoming an active supporter of SB 350, Clean Energy and Pollution Reduction Act 2015. I think if we look at what has gone on with this bill to date, it is really like a rocket speeding through the legislature. It is something that I believe that we should be at the table. I think our function, in my opinion, as that of a board member, is not to sit by and watch things happen, but to be an active part of those decision-making apparatus that goes on, whether or not it's here, when we're making rules, in Sacramento, or in Congress. And when we see bills of this nature that is really supported by every major industry, pretty much it is in California today, for us to be saying that we're going to sit on and be an active monitor, I think defeats the purpose of why we really are here. We have, as we can see, even with Elaine leaving today, very noteworthy scientists that can make a direct contribution that can be heard. We should not, if we want to make amendments to a bill, I think we should be sitting and saying that we want to make amendments. But just to sit back and take no action just to say that our board is going to be monitoring, I think is not what part of our function. So I would like to ask the board to join in my motion to say that we would actively support this. As to whether or not our staff believes that there should be amendments to that bill is to state that that would be the case also, but not to just say that we're going to actively monitor it in that regard. So I move that the board would actively support SB 350.
I second Dr. Parker's motion and fully support all of his comments.
And if there's a third, I third that motion, okay.
We have a motion and a second. If we could ask the clerk to
Chair,
open the
Mr.
roll.
Chairman.
Oh, do we have anyone who would like to speak? Supervisor Benoit?
This is a landmark legislation. It's going to have major impacts on business and how we live in California. And some would argue very vehemently that it's the absolutely right thing to do and all those impacts will be positive. I'm not quite sure that I'm ready to support that yet because I'm not quite sure what the final product's going to be or what the impacts will be at the end of the day. I understand that SCAQMD's staff and everybody be anxious to be in part of this discussion, but I'm going to have to say I will not support this at this time because I'm not sure, one, that it's the right thing to do, or two, that we've seen the final product or know exactly what it's going to look like.
Supervisor Rutherford?
I was wondering if anybody has a sense of how much of the bill is now superseded by the governor's executive order this week, or if the bill is going to continue along those lines. I haven't had a chance to do the analysis.
The bill is continuing. The bill was in Senate Environmental Quality on Wednesday and passed out of that committee. clearly there's an intent to have reflection of the governor's executive order into this bill in part, so that we expect that that will be worked out between the governor's office and the pro tem as the bill moves along.
How did it come out of the committee? What was the vote?
The vote, I believe, was 5-2, I believe.
Okay, Supervisor Nelson.
Thank you. I'd just be on the topic, and I don't mean to confuse the order, but I just want to make a comment on 335, because I think we may be slipping a different item in with the overall motion. And I'd like that pulled separately, given our results at the last meeting.
We also would like, since the supervisors mentioned 335, we would like the board to know that that bill failed in committee, and that the assemblyman didn't ask for reconsideration, so that bill is dead. So when you get to that bill, we wanted you to have that piece of information.
So, I'm sorry, do we oppose bills that don't exist?
Before you, and then you're.
Just be like kind of a
The
moral
board can do
victory.
whatever the board wants to do, is my
Well,
answer to that.
I understand, and I sort of had the floor, Mr. Chairman, so with all due respect, listen, this was an item that didn't pass. Now, it didn't win either. I mean, it was sort of in purgatory. I realize that this is a nice way to sweep it in, but there was no majority on this board that was willing to adopt it. And if it's dead anyway, it just stings a little, like a poke in the eye, to kind of have this ask to oppose it on our
Okay,
agenda.
Supervisor, let me explain. Maybe I should have been clearer from the get-go. The operating procedure of the board is that if something's before the board and there isn't a decision made by the board, there's no 7 votes to approve something one way or disapprove it. By the rules of the board, it automatically comes back on the next governing board agenda. That is why it's there. And the reason I spoke up quickly was because I wanted to make sure that the board knew, as you all contemplate this, and we were going to bring this up anyway, that in fact the bill had died. So I wasn't going to let you take action without informing you that that had happened with this bill.
Mr. Chairman, when it's appropriate, if that's the case, then I would just suggest that we take no position on that item at all. If it's dead, doesn't need our input.
Let me see. Board Member Mitchell.
I just want to mention on SB 350 that the language in that bill is pretty well defined at this point. A lot of the language in the bill was existing language, and additional language has been added to clarify the points that Senator DeLeon wants to bring forward. So if you have a chance to actually look at SB 350, I urge all those of you who think the bill isn't refined enough to take a look at it, to study that language. It's pretty complete at this point. And I would support the motion to support this bill. It's the governor's, one of the governor's primary initiatives coming up in this term, and it supports the mission of this agency, this organization. As I said earlier, when in beginning comments, that this agency, and we are trying to do this, is ask for criteria pollutant reductions along with greenhouse gas reductions. So we will continue to pursue that course of action, because we need criteria pollutant reduction here in this basin, probably more than any district in the United States. And I think as long as we push forward with that agenda, we'll be doing a service to our communities and to our district. Thank you.
Supervisor Benoit?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Might I suggest we take these items, maybe the first 2 together as a vote, and then the last 2 individually?
I'm sorry.
I believe we might have consensus on the first 2 items, and I would suggest maybe we take a motion on those 2 first, and then do the others separately?
Sure. Would the maker of the motion do that?
On item number 21, would you be willing to divide the bills into two?
And will the second of the motion take that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I believe
Third-
there is also a
and-
card to speak.
I'm sorry?
There is also a card to speak from the public on this item, 21.
Yes, we do. Dr. Williams? Would you like to speak on this item? He doesn't know what it is, but he'll speak on it.
Dr. Tom Williams, also with the Sierra Club Transportation Committee. Sierra Club's trying to gain national support for 1308. Why? Freight. Why in LA? Because we have the largest port in the United States. Freight, freight, freight. Basic issue, get it on rail. Trucks have a real problem. I've dealt with ports many times, and we always go back as to the most efficient movement of freight from a port is by rail. And since we don't consume everything that goes through the port, we have to become more competitive, because in a couple more years, we're going to have to deal with a great deal more competition. So if you want to keep freight in LA, get it on rail. Thank you.
Before I open the roll, I think I should explain to everybody that last week, last month, it shows you how fast time goes for me. When we took the vote on this, actually, the opposition would have won if we took it on a majority vote. I've served on this board close to 22 years, as everybody knows. And I was told when I came here that it was a mandate in the health and safety code that it required 7 votes. So after the vote last month, I asked the chief legal counsel to send me the health and safety code which said that. And I did not read it as it has been read over the past 22 years. So I have asked the executive director, who thinks it's very clear in the way that he sees it. I think it's very clear in the way I see it. He and I went at it yesterday about it in a friendly way. But I would like to get a legislative analyst's opinion so that we can understand if, in fact, we actually need 7 votes on every item, or once you have a quorum, does the majority rule? So I would hope that by the time the board meets next month, that we can have this clarified by the Ledge Council. Okay, so on this item, the maker of the motion is asking for an aye vote. Can we open the roll?
Mr. Chairman, just to get clarification, this first vote, I believe, is on the first 2 legislative bills that everyone seems to agree on, and the second and third votes will be on the other 2 bills.
I don't think we need a roll call on that. Is there any opposition to the first 2 bills? Seeing none, that item is carried. Okay, will you open the roll on the third bill?
SB 350, right?
SB 350.
Okay.
Hello? Hello? There we go.
Lock in your votes.
Close the roll. Yeah. That bill, it carries. That item is approved. Okay, moving to the next item.
Take a position on the bill that Supervisor Nelson mentioned, or not take a position. I think the motion is to not take a position, right? Or, oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. The original motion was to support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh, I was down as absent. That's because I didn't lock my vote in,
Don't make me take it back.
but it passed anyway, so should have been down as a no vote.
Anyway, Mr. Chair, I think we could use some clarification as to the vote on the, yeah.
We may need a paramedic for Barry that I voted yes on the last item. Somebody fan him and just keep him relaxed.
Hey, Kurt, do not give him mouth to mouth.
Mr. Chairman, if it's been separated from the original motion, there's no motion on the floor, I would move that we take no position as to this item as it is dead.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Supervisor.
I'm sorry, my motion is that we take no position on this final item as it is dead.
Okay. Open the roll. Then you're asking for a yes vote.
Correct.
Oh, that's why. Okay. Close the roll. That motion carries. Moving to item 27. Dr. Williams, you don't have a card in on 27. Oh, you want to speak on it, right? Oh, yeah, oh, I'm sorry. I missed your card. Let them give the staff presentation first. How's that?
Thank you, Dr. Burke. This is the annual meeting of the Brain and Lung Tumor and Air Pollution Foundation. Megan Lorenz, who's the counsel for the foundation, is going to handle this item.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. The foundation is a nonprofit corporation established at the direction of the governing board in 2003 under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. The foundation's directors are currently Dr. Burke, Supervisor Antonovich, Mayor Yates, and Dr. Parker. The purpose of the foundation is to aid, assist, and support research on the incidence, detection, causes, and cures of brain and lung tumors, especially those caused or aggravated by air pollution. To date, the foundation has provided over $5 million in grants to medical researchers investigating the links between brain and lung cancer and air pollution. Under the foundation's Articles of Incorporation, the governing board is the sole member of the foundation. This item constitutes the annual meeting of the foundation. In addition, today we are recommending that the governing board ratify the appointment of Dr. Burke to the foundation board. The district's chief financial officer, Michael Kelly, will report on the foundation's finances, but first, Dr. Jean Hospital, the district's health effects officer, will provide you with an update on research funded by the foundation that is currently underway.
Briefly, the foundation currently has one project it has funded that is underway. That is with Cedars-Sinai Medical Center with Dr. Keith Black and Dr. Julia Lubimova as the principal researchers. It's a one-year laboratory study, a one-year exposure of laboratory animals to particulate air pollutants, including ultrafine particles. That exposure is going underway in collaboration with the University of California at Irvine, and is scheduled to have the exposure completed in July. The original timeframe for this project was to have it completed by September of this year. However, there was a power outage at Cedars that resulted in loss of a number of their stored samples. They were stored in the freezer. By the time the power outage was recognized, the samples had thawed and were lost. This significantly affects the conduct of the research, as the previous samples from exposures to a shorter term to particulates, 1, 3, and 6 months, were to be compared to the one-year exposures to meet the goals of the study. Cedars-Sinai administration has committed to fund replication of these past studies so that the samples will be available to complete the project. However, this resulted in a delay in the anticipated completion to May of next year. That concludes my description of the current projects. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Tom Williams, Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community. One of our board members is an epidemiologist. She's quite interested in this particular program, but she didn't really know of it until, I might say, last month. So we're trying to figure out how can you, might say, get this more into the public forum. A bigger piece on the homepage for AQMD would be recommended. Maybe if there is going to be a more lengthy presentation, can it get online, real time? So can you broadcast it through the internet? We're trying to help you on this one because, I say 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I was particularly concerned regarding PM 100 or 1000 and sulfur dioxide. Now it's PM1 or less, and other air pollutants and how it affects people directly. I think you also should have a major component within the AQMP regarding your efforts here. Thank you.
And I think that it will be, if I understand correctly, when Dr. Black comes to make the presentation, it will be on our broadcast in our regular meeting. May I get a motion on this item, please?
I'll move to approve, but I wanted discussion too, to receive and file.
Second, any opposition? Hearing none.
Just a couple comments, Mr.
Yes,
Chair?
yes, I'm sorry.
And I support Dr. Williams. I want to bring up just really quick, there was an event this past week I attended, Matt spoke at, in Pomona, the Southern California 2015 Logistics and Supply Chain Summit. And I bring this up because this study is important. There was a gentleman who spoke, and one of the topics was diesel emissions, new facts clear up old fears.
There are two actions to it.
I'll do the second part to ratify your appointment. So at this conference, and I sat there at the lunch, this gentleman, John Husing from the Inland Empire organization, cited a study, Dr. Hospital, it's called the Health Effects Institute of Boston, and I guess they tested exposure to 2007 compliant diesel engines, and it was, I'm just remembering listening to it, and it was almost that there's no impact on human health, or the impact's been reduced so much, as the title says, diesel emissions, new facts clear up old fears. And I talked to a number of people outside, and they said, well, that clears it up. There's no problem with diesel emissions. I'm going, wait a second. We've got this health study here going on at Cedars-Sinai, and I just heard about 400 people listen to this talk, that there's no more problems because in the East Coast, they expose animals or people to this, and there was no problem.
Was that using?
Yes. So if you could just make a comment about that, because I said, we were doing a study at Cedars-Sinai that has actually, I said, well, it's different diesel or something.
Well, John Husing is not a air pollutant expert. He is a economist, and I'm surprised he would even comment on that.
He was citing a study indicating just that the new study just came out, or.
I know him. I've seen him when he make a buck, so.
But if Dr. Ross
I
can
would
comment
disregard
about that.
any comments he made about that.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Couple of points of clarification. The study Cedars is doing is with ambient particle exposure, so it's particles they're collecting in the atmosphere, concentrating, so they're not specific to any source. Regarding the Health Effects Institute study, this was a 2-year plus study of laboratory animals to diesel exhaust. Couple of points on it in terms of the proceedings of the exposures. Since the new technology engines have much less particulate exposures, 99 or so 90+% less particulates, it was difficult to do an exposure of a comparable level with previous studies with diesel exhaust. So the researchers elected to do the equivalency on nitrogen oxide exposures. So the exhaust level of nitrogen dioxide was similar in the new study as in previous study. The particulate levels, however, were a factor of about 200 lower. So, and you're right, in terms of the characterization, there were no tumors developed in these animals. There was a lung injury in the lower airways that was attributed to the nitrogen dioxide exposures. And there was also an expert review committee on the study, and they actually did address the relative toxicity of new diesel particulates versus the traditional diesel particulate as the AGI report described them. And they concluded that the study was not designed to do a comparable study, so we don't know what the comparable toxicity on a per mass of particle is on this study. They also concluded the most likely explanation for the lack of cancer effects is because of the much lower exposure. And in our MATE studies, we of course use emissions estimates of the current fleet for diesel exposure, so any reductions because of the fleet turnover and reduction of risk thereby are taken into account.
And that's why my comments would agree with Dr. Williams that we've got to get our message out because, you know, I had people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're AQMD, and look at this new studies." And I said, well, there's a difference. I'm glad you explained it now. And the only other second comment I have is maybe in the future we can put out a request for a proposal to all the different doctors and hospitals and institutions in the area to see what's out there that they would like to study with regard to health impacts.
Maybe we should ask the good doctor to prepare some papers that Mr. Atwood might be able to get out to some appropriate publications so that we could take the light from underneath the barrel and shine it out to the world. We need one more action item on this.
Mr. Chair, I'll support both
Yeah.
action items to receive and file and to ratify the appointment of Dr. Burke as the foundation director,
Second.
replacing former board member Josie Gonzalez.
It's a motion.
Yes, it's a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, is there any opposition to that item?
I just was going to bring up an item under the MATE study that was related to the conversation, so I figured it might be timely now. I support the motion, but I did note in the comment section on the MATE study that this issue was brought up by one of the commenters of whether new PM diesel exhaust is less toxic than old PM diesel exhaust. And I asked staff about it, and they indicated that they're not aware of any study that's directly looking at pound for pound, ounce for ounce, gram for gram comparison of the toxicity of the diesel particulates of the different types of diesel that were now being emitted based on whether you have an old truck or a new one, or an old engine or a new one. So I just want to confirm that I understood that right from staff, and if so, I mean, does staff think that it would be helpful for us to support or maybe perhaps even fund research into that issue? I'm not sure if there's a theoretical reason why the particulates might be different.
Yes, I'm not aware of any current study that's looking at this direct comparison. However, related to this, the board has funded a study at UCLA that is aimed at developing a kind of a dose response toxicity assay in an in vitro in a laboratory study. And should that be successful, they're well along the way on it, and it should be, then this type of assay can be used to look at different exhausts, old versus new, and at least in that type of assay, look at some comparative differences. It's not an epidemiology study, it's not an animal study, but at least it's related to what we think the mechanism of toxicity is. So in the future, I think we can do those types of things.
Thank you.
Yes, Supervisor.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. You know, the tone of the discussion is interesting, and it's kind of an area, I think there's some diversity on this board. I think that the study that was cited by Mr. Husing and the MATES study and a few others out there kind of go along the lines of maybe we've actually done some good and improved the situation dramatically. Yet there's a kind of a, but if we do that, maybe we don't need this board any longer. We got to have a problem to keep addressing. Well, we have maybe the worst air quality in the country, although if you look at the MATES study, the risks are dramatically better than when I was playing football on the field.
And when I got there, too.
Yeah. And I think we just got to be careful not to sound like we don't want to declare victory until there's nobody else suffering from asthma as a result of air quality. I understand that, and it would be inappropriate because we don't want to see people suffer. But we should be at least balanced in looking at these other points of view, and particularly when it talks about whether or not those people are going to have jobs to feed their families. Some of the things we do really impact that too. So I just point out that there are legitimately two sides to this discussion, and we have had some success.
No question about that. Dr. Parker?
Are you saying that there are two definitions of toxicity as it relates to that of diesel particulates?
There's different, what we might call endpoints for toxic effects. One endpoint would be cancer, for example. So for diesel exhaust, there have been a number of studies in the occupational setting where exhaust exposures are higher relatively. Exposures have occurred over 20, 30-year periods, which is a time period for cancer to develop. So that's one type of an endpoint. Other endpoints are cell injury or changes in cell biochemistry that you can look at in a shorter term study in a laboratory. You don't need 20 or 30-year exposures. And so it was the latter type that I was talking about, where the changes in biochemistry can be related to the mechanism of progression of a disease like cancer or a lung injury. And so these are relatively quick assays, if you could call it, laboratory-based, that can give an idea of relative activity related to toxicity.
Thank you.
All right. We have a motion and a second out there on this. Is there any opposition to that? Hearing none, that item is approved. Item 28.
It's me again, Gene Hospital, your Health Effects Officer, to give a brief summary of our draft MATES final report. Just a brief recap in terms of the study components. Of course, has monitoring updated of toxic emissions inventory and a regional modeling to estimate region-wide exposures to air toxics and risk. We have a technical advisory group that we bounce our plans off of and get some advice from them on how to improve the study. In terms of the draft report, this was presented to the board at the October 25th, 2014 meeting. It was released for 90-day public review, also presented to our technical advisory group. We did receive a number of comments, mostly related to technical aspects of the report, on data presentation, and of course, we always have a few errors and edits to correct. In terms of the key revisions to the draft, it includes the revised methodology that the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment has promulgated regarding estimating cancer risk from air toxics. This document was released in March, and so staff recalculated the risk based on this methodology. In using the methodology, we used an 80th percentile of the breathing rate distribution for individuals 2 and over. For under 2, we use the 95th percentile breathing rates. And this was in anticipation of Air Resources Board adoption of guidance on implementing the new OEHA methodology. This resulted in a change in risk of about 2.5 basin-wide and in our monitoring. We added language to the report to hopefully clarify that this is not a change in exposure. Relative risks are still reduced. It is just a change in calculation methodology, and the risks are different than we had previously realized. We added to the discussion on the cow and virus screen model. We included this brief description. The added language refers to that the cow and virus screen is not a risk assessment. It's more a ranking of environmental variables, including demographic variables and health variables for different regions of the state. We increased our description of the methodology we use to calculate diesel exposures. Of course, there is no direct methodology for estimating diesel particulate matter, so we use elemental carbon as a surrogate and the emissions inventory of diesel particulate and elemental carbon to factor the ratio of elemental carbon that we measured in the atmosphere to diesel particulate. We added an appendix for ultrafine particles, and we also added appendices for the comments received and staff responses to those comments. Again, the board has seen this slide before. This is a relative difference in risk between 2005 and 2012 between our MATES 3 and MATES 4 study. As you can see, most of the area had decreases in risk, so this is indeed a good news story with the largest reductions in risk near the ports. In terms of the impact of the...
Can you repeat again, sir? The largest reductions in the ports area?
Was in the ports area, yes.
And we need to remind ourselves of that. Amazing work that's been done by both ports.
I'm hard of hearing. Did he say port area?
He sure did, for the record.
Thank you.
We can do more, though. We have a lot of work to do. But really appreciate the efforts on both ports on the accomplishments of reducing emissions, and I've seen it. I've heard the success stories as well, and a great partnership with SCAQMD as well. Really want to acknowledge that. Sorry to interrupt, but needed to point that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, some of that decrease in emissions was from the screaming that was done by the port officials blowing out that pollution to the ocean because we were dragging them under rule. That was part of the reason they reduced so. That's right.
Okay, this next chart shows the effect of the revised calculation methodology with the red bars showing the 2.5 times increase in our estimates of cancer risk on our 10 monitoring sites, and the bars on the right show that the risk is from the old methodology is about 400 in a million. With the new methodology, it's about 1,000 in a million. In terms of our regional exposures and estimates of risk, this is our relative risk map using the updated OEHA methodologies. Again, the largest risks are shown around the goods movement protocols, and although the greatest reductions occurred at the port areas still have the highest relative risk throughout the air basin. Just briefly go through some of the key comments. One was that we should use EPA's risk estimates, as they're often newer than OEHA's. However, to be consistent with our state mandates, the toxics hotspots and board direction in the past, as well as previous studies, we use OEHA's risk estimates. Sometimes they're a little higher, sometimes they're a little lower, oftentimes they're actually the same as EPA's. We also wanted to point out that the revised methodology is included in the report, and so we can compare the changes in the risk by the methodology as well as compare it to future studies on risk. So both of the outputs for both methods are there. And again, no matter which methodology you use, the relative change in risks does not change. A lot of comments on how we did our estimates of diesel PM. As I noted previously, we expanded our discussion of that, so hopefully it's more clear now. We got an interesting comment in terms of future studies, that instead of doing all these sites and work, we might want to just keep one site going, have it measure annually to follow what the changes in air toxics are. So we'll consider that for future studies. The risk factors, again, we use OEHA factors, Cal Enviros green up expansion I've mentioned. We also put in some clarifying language on black carbon and ultrafine particles in relation to air toxics and why we wanted to include them in this study. Staff recommendation is that the board receive and file the report. The report is available online.
Is there any questions by my colleagues? Thank you very much. May I have a motion to receive and file?
So moved.
Is there any opposition to that? Then we will, that item is received and filed. Item 29.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Burke, members of the board. Philip Fine, Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in Planning and Rules. Happy to talk to you today about some draft.
We have no speakers cards on this.
Oh. Okay, so.
I just threw that out for general information. I just, you know, I love you, Phil.
I'll put one in next time.
Why don't we try it? Do any of my colleagues have any questions for Dr. Fine on this item?
Fine job.
Dr. Lou, Janice Rutherford?
I must.
Supervisor?
I'm sure I do.
Well, why don't Supervisor Rutherford?
It's early, we
up to
must have a
bat,
question or two.
Then you can follow her.
Since I'm coming in after this process began, I was wondering if you could explain to me the working groups that you've had contributing to this and how many meetings there have been and what the point of that public and interest party communication is, and maybe how some of the comments or their participations are reflected in the work we see today.
Okay, so there's 10 2016 AQMP white papers being developed. Each one has an independent working group. Different working groups have met at different frequencies and different timing. These two white papers I was going to talk about today, I think the PM working group met at least 3 times, as well as the VOC white paper, I believe it was about 3 times as well, including a meeting since the draft was released to take input on the draft. Prior to that, in the previous meetings, what we had talked to the working groups about are outlines for the white papers, which we ran through the working groups, gave time for comment, received comments, which we didn't receive that many on at least these 2 white papers on change of outline. Staff proceeded to put together a discussion draft, which is out there now, and we have received and are continuing to receive comments on that before we finalize. So it's been several months. The working groups have had input, and the ultimate goal is to get that input and have these white papers as kind of a policy framework for development of the AQMP. But we are very open to the comments, are making changes as we speak to the drafts, at least on these 2, to reflect the comments we've received.
And Supervisor, if I could add, we plan to come back to the board hopefully in September, once we've issued all these white papers, taking comment, to have the board take up, in essence, the total of the kind of general policy framework that Phil was just describing, which will then lead into the AQMP.
They're great background and great scientific research. I learned a lot from reading them, even though it was very late last night. And then I got a really good night's sleep after reading them. To what extent will the format of these change and become not just the scientific background, but have the specific recommendations and controls in them, or is that what happens with the AQMP?
Our intention was that would happen with the AQMP. These are designed to have the scientific background plus some recommendations for a policy framework for the AQMP, without specific measures mentioned, because that is part of the AQMP public process when we get into the control measures that will be guided by some of this policy framework. Again, subject to change with public input and the board input.
So any member of that working group or anyone else in the public who takes a look at this and has some concerns with either the science or the conclusions drawn from it, they still have plenty of time to give their input. This is not an accepting of the draft today.
Yeah, we've asked them to give us our comments quickly so we can make revisions, but we're still taking comment on both these, correct?
Define quickly.
So what you said is absolutely true.
What sort of deadline might one attach to what I
We
said?
didn't give a hard deadline because, again, we wanted to come in front of the board, get board input.
This afternoon, yeah.
No.
Okay, so we'll continue to urge people to participate.
Yes.
It struck me as very heavy on the science, which I know is what you all do, and not as heavy on the perspectives of the community. That I think there's still some comments out there that are going to come in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can get my mic to work. I do remember what my concern was because I have it written down here. And that is that we have state ambient air quality standards also. And you know that I've been kind of persistent about saying we have to pay attention to those things too. The law says we have to pay attention to those. And in fact, the law says that we have to put into our plan schedules and deadlines for attaining the state ambient air quality standard at the earliest date achievable by the application of all reasonable available control measures and technologies. So I'm a little concerned that we're paying so much attention to the federal standards that we're not paying attention to the state standards, especially ozone and PM, that are very aggressive standards and less accommodating when it comes to exceptional events and things. So I want to make sure that we're on track to comply with our requirements, our legal requirements for the state standards. And so I want to check in with staff and make sure you're doing that.
Dr. Liu, I think what we are finding is that as the federal government has now begun to truly update in a routine manner the ozone and particulate standards, that it will take this region everything that is feasible to do to achieve those standards, and that we couldn't go any faster to meet a more stringent state standard. And since the state standards aren't by a date certain, but the earliest date, achievable, I think by definition we will be doing the best we can by simply meeting the federal standards.
So it probably would be helpful if we put in the white papers and definitely in the AQMP that this sort of explanation and explain any differences between attaining PM 2.5 and the PM 10 standard, federal and state. You understand that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Get in the weeds. Thank you.
Fine. Any further questions by my colleagues? Does this need a motion?
This is a receive and file item,
Okay.
so we'd
So it
appreciate
does
that.
not need a motion?
No.
Okay. Item 30.
Good morning, Dr. Burke, members of the governing board. Not sure if there's any speaker cards here or not, so I'll start brief and then we can expand as the board desires, if that pleases the chair. My name, for the record, my name is Michael O'Kelly. I'm the CFO with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. I'm presenting the fiscal year 2015-2016 draft budget and work program and fee adjustments. In summary, the budget requests $137 million in expenditures, $135 million in revenues, and $2 million use of prior year revenues from unreserved fund balance to balance out the budget. Maintains the unreserved fund balance at 28% of general fund revenues, which is 8% higher than the governing board's policy of a minimum of 20%. Also includes a CPI fee increase of 1.4% and the second year of the board-approved fee increase of 6% that was approved last fiscal year. In addition, on this board letter, you'll see some other miscellaneous end-of-year cleanup funding items. I'll go through these slides as quick as possible here, and I may skip a few. This just wraps up. This shows the district's overall financial picture. The blue section of the pie is the general fund budget. The remaining sections of the pie, which account for about 55%, those are expenditures that come to the governing board through individual board letters throughout the year. Those are for truck replacements, marine vessel replacements, things of that nature. The blue section of the pie is the general fund budget. That's for all the compliance activities, monitoring activities, planning activities, administrative costs, in addition to the program administrative costs for those other slices of the pie. Population change. This was a slide we showed at the governing board workshop that Dr. Burke had a question on. We're showing the increase over the last 15 years in the district. You see total population increase, it's 26%. You see higher on a percentage basis in the inland counties. But when you look at it from an actual population basis, I think Dr. Burke pointed out that even though the percentages may be higher in those inland counties, the actual number of people in those counties, it's higher in LA County. So the intent was not to mislead, but I can see how it looks misleading, in which we show 13%. But when you look at the bodies, it's actually the highest increase in actual population.
That, Mr. Chairman, I could make a quick point there. I understand your concern, but I should point out that Riverside became the 10th most populous county in the nation last month, passing Queensboro in New York at 2.3 million people. So we are growing. I just want to make that point.
The other point I want to make about that is and as you brought that up, was a difference in traffic patterns. Since the 1960s, I was looking at population figures after you brought that up, and Dr. Burke brought that up. I was looking at as ports movement and stuff. I looked at Victorville and Rancho Cucamonga in 1960, and the population of both those combined cities was about 15 to 20,000. Today it's over 350,000. And Riverside is the fastest growing county now in the state, and probably the second or third largest in the state. When you look at all these people that are coming into Los Angeles, it's no longer this north-south traffic pattern. It's everybody coming into Los Angeles County from San Bernardino, Riverside, they're high desert. So there's big differences in traffic patterns, which should make us examine transportation decisions much differently. Thanks.
The next slide shows a budget summary. I think if you look at the first column here, yes, Dr. Burke.
That was an excellent point. You know, in our planning, are we looking at the way that population growth patterns are shifting?
Yes, Dr. Burke, that's incorporated into the underpinnings, and the information comes from SCAG and then is integrated into the emissions estimates.
Okay.
The next slide's a budget summary. Thank you, Dr. Burke. The first column there shows shows the fiscal year 14-15 adopted budget. Then when the next column shows amended, that's based on governing board approved changes. Dr. Parker had a question on that, and we'll address that on a couple slides later here on the revenue side. The fiscal year end estimate, which is the third column, I think is right now maybe one of the more important estimates. You'll see that even though the amended budget authorizes the use of $3.7 million of unreserved fund balance, our estimate shows that we'll actually add approximately $200,000 to the fund balance. So this is a pretty sweet spot from a finance perspective in a government agency where your revenues exactly equal your expenditures and your fund balance is a little bit above what the governing board's policy is. Moving on to the final column there is the proposed budget. Yes, Dr. Burke.
Have we ascertained if there are any other government or what, you know, there's some, but what percentage of government agencies issue permits at a cost-neutral basis? The mayor says Chino does, but I don't know if the county of Los Angeles does, or you try to. Okay, because at some point, if we're going to program ourselves out of business, we got to go to a cost-neutral situation. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. So again, this column's a summary. We're requesting the use of $2.2 million of prior year revenues that's in unreserved fund balance. You also see the FTE count is a net increase of 3 over the amended budget. That's for 2 of the transitional youth positions that Supervisor Antonovich mentioned, and a position in engineering and compliance. To address a question Dr. Parker had back at the board workshop, he requested some information on the revenue increases from the adopted budget to the amended budget. So there are regular items that come up during the year that weren't included in the budget. There's expenditures, and there's usually a revenue or a funding source to address those. So we categorize these here. There's special monitoring programs that the governing board approved during the fiscal year that were funded primarily by transfers in from other special funds, or in the case of the Exide monitoring, by the facility itself. Also federal grants. At the time the budget's prepared, we don't have final numbers on certain federal grants, so we adjust for that when we receive final numbers during the fiscal year. And then at the third line there is also for special revenue funded incentive programs, Clean Fuels Prop 1B. When we come to the board and request approval to issue the contracts to replace trucks and things of that nature, we also generally ask for additional administrative costs to get those programs done. That results in transfers or revenues into the general fund as well. So that makes up the difference, the $7 million that Dr. Parker had requested a little more detail on. The next slide here just shows the inflation impact on SCAQMD budgets. So this is the total general fund budget going back to 91-92. If you just take it on a dollar for dollar perspective, that's the blue line. The budget would be up 21%. If you take that 1991-92 general fund budget of $113 million, you add CPI to it, we're about 30% lower than that. You'd be at about $175 million. Also at the bottom, you'll see the staffing levels in 91-92 were almost 1,200, whereas today the proposed staffing level is 800. So about a 350 person reduction there. The next slide shows the actual, I'm going to go ahead and let this roll through, shows the actual stationary source revenue, not just the whole budget, but the actual revenue, also compared to CPI. The bottom blue line is all of the stationary source fee revenue, so that's annual operating, emissions fees, permit processing fees, compared to the red line, which is CPI, and we're using a baseline year of 91-92. Supervisor Rutherford asked if this included penalties and settlements, so we went ahead and included that to show a second data set, which is the green line that shows actual stationary source fee revenues plus penalties and settlements, and CPI, which obviously is adjusted a little bit higher. Generally see the same trend line there as the previous slide that we showed. Cost reduction efforts. This is just to remind the governing board of the actions that the board has taken over the last 9 to 10 years to reduce some of the district's costs. When you add up these costs on an ongoing basis, if these things did not happen, if we were still paying on the headquarters, if we did not have the increased vacancy rate, et cetera, it's about $15 million a year. So as these things occur, they seem somewhat small, but over time they build upon themselves. Dr. Burke asked a question, I'll go back one slide. We talk about deleted select vacant positions. These obviously have an impact on staffing levels. Dr. Burke just asked for a reminder to the governing board of the positions that were deleted, and also the second to last line shows the impact of the vacancy rate increase. Vacancy rate increase is really a de facto deletion of positions in that you're not funding that number of positions. So the total is 64. This goes back to 2010. So you'll see significant levels in the administrative clerical area and then pretty evenly distributed throughout the district.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chairman? Yes. May I ask a question? The idea of a vacant position is one that's kind of difficult to define and changes from organization to organization. At the state level, when I was working with positions on the highway patrol, any position that was vacant for more than a year was automatically deleted from the process. And that may not be the best course of action, but it was a budgeting tool that helped you maintain the kind of gains we've had. Do we have a policy about how long a vacant position stays on the budget even though it's been vacant?
Not that I'm aware of, Supervisor. The way we're using this is over the course of a year or from year to year, there are different program demands that may require different types of positions. So as people retire, there may be a need in one of the other program areas for a position. So this gives us flexibility to stay within the board's guidance on total budget, the board's direction on program activities, and to have operating flexibility. And that's the way it's used.
Well, I understand you want to have flexibility, and that's, from your chair, exactly where I'd be if I were sitting there. From a board's perspective, though, I wonder if we should have some kind of a policy. If a position's been open 3 years, 5 years, is there a point where it should come off the books until it's rejustified? That would be my position.
Well, maybe what we could do as a first step is to look at the positions and see how long they're, some of these have been vacant.
Like I said, being chairman of the complaint department, because you get every complaint that comes down the pike comes to you directly, so. And one of the main complaints is, the processing of permits and
The timelines.
the time which it takes. And so I look at here and I see that between administrative and permitting, you got the bulk of the empty spots. So it's something that we ought to think about, because there may be, we ought to shift the priority around and move some of these vacancies around also.
I don't disagree at all. As a matter of fact, I absolutely agree. And the course of action of deleting vacant positions has been deleted for a long time. Really helps to push that discussion. Well, if we're going to delete this one, should we instead move it to here and so forth?
I agree. All right.
Nelson?
Is that it? I'm sorry?
Chair, Supervisor Nelson has his name up.
I'm sorry, Supervisor Nelson, I didn't mean to.
Not at all, just to piggyback on Supervisor Benoit's statement. One of the unique things about being a county supervisor, we have a pretty broad variety of opportunities to serve. I know a lot of you, I run into it a number of other places as well, but it's pretty common in most civic organizations that a one-year vacancy causes a deletion. I mean, the city I served as mayor at had that as a standard. The county that I serve at has that as a standard. If the position's vacant for over a year, it's a budgeting gimmick. I mean, that's what it is. Now, you call it by a lot of names, but
Right.
To say we're below budget because we're leaving positions open and they haven't been filled in X amount of years, if you don't need someone in that position, it should be eliminated. That's good policy, by the way, for your wife's closet. I try and get away with that. If you haven't worn it in a year and it's based on something other than we didn't go skiing last year, that's it. You're probably not going to wear it anyway. You'll buy something new. If you haven't hired someone in a year for the position, unless there's an exceptional reason, we were waiting for a great intern to graduate and we just knew we kind of had this
Right.
perfect person. I mean, there's always an exception, but
Why don't I refer
the
this
board
to-
would prefer this, the staff wouldn't, we all know why, but it puts the board in tighter control. The staff gets to
Why don't I refer
move
it to
things around.
personnel, have them look at it and send it back to us?
I'd just like you to change the rule right now, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'm,
And you'd like to clean out your wife's closet too, but.
yeah, right.
No, I'd
well,
like to clean out mine, it just has a lot of her stuff, there's a difference.
Right. You can stay at my house tonight, don't worry, man. There's always a room for you over at the place. Okay. Any other comments for okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Do we need a motion on this?
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval, but I have a comment on the, does this include the goals and objectives and everything? I couldn't see it in my report on the iPad, but I made a motion to amend those, to add one last time, and what I wanted to add, I don't know if it's in there because I couldn't see it, was to promote, support, and partner with other organizations and groups on strategies and programs to encourage multimodal forms of transportation such as bus, light rail, heavy rail, bicycle, to actually accomplish our mission, which is to reduce traffic congestion and air pollution and reduce and improve the air quality. So I made that last time. And
You can ask that as a question, if it's in there?
Yeah, is it in
Then
there?
you can make the motion, but you can't make the motion and put that in there.
I have it in
Because I
front of me, and I don't
specifically
see that
remember you
specific
saying
language,
that.
so I,
Okay, then can I make a
Sure.
motion to amend it?
yes.
No, I'll come back to you.
Okay, thanks.
Would somebody like to make a motion to approve this?
I'd like to make the motion to approve it with the language that,
Very
I don't know if
good.
it's Mayor or Councilmember Cacciatti.
Councilmember.
Councilmember Cacciatti proposed.
Would you like to second?
Second it, thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chair, thanks, Joe.
Now we got a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to this item? Hearing none, this item, oh, wait, this is,
Curtis.
yeah, Curtis, I'm sorry. I had you in my hand because I knew you was,
Okay. Well, I had two things to talk about. Now I have three, but it's not related to the card. First of all, I want to say we, on behalf of Curtis Coleman, Southern California Air Quality Alliance, we support the staff's proposed budget. And again, this is under the, on the condition that the staff moves forward with filling the necessary vacant positions in engineering and permitting to allow for the permit processing program to move forward in a same manner or a better manner than it has been over the last few years. This is very critical to our members to be able to get permits in a timely manner. Number two, I would, with Dr. Chang's retirement, again, it shows how the district is losing a large, significant part of its institutional memory and its top-notch qualifications. And this is the time that you need to be in a process of passing that knowledge on to the next generation of district staff. And I would urge the board to do whatever you can to assure that the staff morale is maintained, that the top people are retained, so that that knowledge can be passed on to other top people as this district moves forward. And then finally, with regard to, well, the other thing that, back to number one, this is what happens when I come up without notes. The only time I ever get reports about how positions are being filled or what the process is every year in the Budget Advisory Committee, beginning, I think, in January or February, where we start getting reports and I ask for information and I get feedback. I think it would be very valuable to us and probably to the board as well if you could get periodic reports to maybe the administrative committee or something about the progress that's being made in filling these critical positions and what the plan is for recruitment and filling other maybe non-critical positions. So I would ask that you take that under advisement. And then we look forward to working with the board and staff going forward, continuing with what we view as a very responsible approach to budgeting and financing the operations of the district. Thank you.
thank you for your testimony, Mr. Coleman. We have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any opposition to that? Hearing none, that item is approved. Item 31.
Item 31, Dr. Bird, staff would like to waive the presentation and just answer your questions or any
Okay.
public comments.
We have one, Mr. Mansfield Collins. Man, I'd be on the 60 out of here. You know, catch me if you can, you know. Yeah, right.
Good morning, members of the panel. I'm just a member of the public, and I'm completely out of my element when it comes to the science of what's taking place. But I live in Walnut, California, and I've been a resident there for 27 years. And our location is a little different in terms of the normal geography of Los Angeles. We not only live in the basin, but we're sort of a basin we're sort of a enclosed area within the basin. And when I looked at the method that you use to determine whether or not an employer has to meet the metric ton requirement or based on average vehicles traveled. I was a little concerned that, for example, Mount SAC has, I think, 1,500 staff employees. And so I think the determination that is made whether or not they're in compliance with Rule 2202, excuse me, would be based on their number of employee vehicles that travel into Mount SAC campus every day. However, since I've lived in Walnut, when we first bought our home in Walnut, there were 13,000 students in Mount SAC. Now there are 65,000 students at Mount SAC. And by 2025, there will be 80,000 students in Mount SAC. In order to get into Mount SAC, the main thoroughfare is Grand Avenue. And you sort of have to come up and then down into the basin, basically, to come into Mount SAC. And I'm concerned that if you're not counting the student vehicles in your assessment of whether or not dangerous emissions are being polluted, you're really undercounting the actual health hazard and the health risk to that small community, which is only 30,000 residents. And I would ask that, and I don't know if this is even the measure, I just saw the AVT, the 2202, and I would ask that you would amend or think about amending for special circumstances, areas that have unique qualities, requiring that additional vehicles are counted that normally would be excluded because of the demographic, geographic makeup of a particular area that actually intensifies the amount of the pollution and the effect of the potential pollution. But I'm not a scientist, but I can tell you this. My city is getting browner. I've had trees that have been cut. I live off of Grand, and I sort of have a feeling that maybe they were cut because of the years of emissions may have had an effect on those trees and that vegetation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Dr. Waterstein?
Hello, I'm Carol Gomez, Planning and Rules Manager. He's correct in that students are not included in 2202 unless they're working students, unless they're actually employed by the university, then those are included. 2202 is meant for employers, for their employees, so that's why it doesn't address students, but the student populations would be accounted for in CEQA documents. And I believe under CEQA for Mount SAC, there's a no expansion a policy, so.
I have to comment, Mr. Chair. I took the bus in today, and I went on the route through Mount SAC and Cal Poly Pomona, as I do every day. And actually, it's interesting that I thought about this at my second stop at Temple and campus. As I looked at the large message sign for Cal Poly, it said, "Please, teachers, administrators, please turn in your AQMD, your survey forms." As when I'm at the Attorney General's office every year, I get the survey form about rideshare, which none of us can ever comply with because you never have the same times in it as anybody else. But that bothered me too, because you've got, and I saw that teachers, staff, administration, and gentleman was right. You look at the 60,000 at Mount SAC, and the problem with Mount SAC right now is there's a major litigation with this issue, Dr. Burke. The college is trying to put in a 5,000 to 7,000 parking structure for cars, and the city says, no, we don't want more cars in our neighborhood. Right. Get people out of cars on the bus that I took, which is jam-packed with students trying to get there. And you got Cal Poly Pomona right adjacent to it with 27,000 students plus thousands of administrators. So you've got 100,000 people in this little square area that are impacting Walnut and some of the cities I represent dramatically. And as I was looking at this rule, can we modify it in some way? I remember I go upstairs and I fill out the survey like all my people do. Is there some way to?
It's an assembly bill, AB.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So, well, we could.
It's kind of interesting. I'm facing the same thing in my neighborhood. we have a school there called Archer, and they're women's institution, and it's fairly large, and they're in a gigantic expansion. They want a gigantic expansion code. So my councilman is Councilman Bonet, who I have the greatest respect for. He endorsed my daughter, so I love him, you know, so. But what he did was, he sent out about a 30-page letter on all the mitigation that this place was going to do, because you've never seen traffic until you've seen Sunset Boulevard between 3 and 5 in the afternoon. It is horrific.
All them BMWs and all that, it's horrible.
No, we have a lot of Ford, we have a lot of
Mercedes all over the place.
have a lot of Ford 150s going home too, okay? So, and it is a real problem, and the mitigation, I don't think, was adequate. So I can identify with this gentleman's problem, and especially if it's has a geographic bowl there. There's there's something here that's not right.
So, Dr. Burke, as Mayor Yates was mentioning, this program is in specific response to a state statute and also a requirement in the Federal Clean Air Act. However, at next week's board retreat, we will be discussing sources that attract a great deal of motor vehicle activity. And so in the context of that discussion, the board could give us direction as to what you would like to do from a policy perspective.
I was just thinking along those lines that we have, you know, this rule that applies to employers, but we really don't have anything that applies to universities, to the colleges around the region. And I think we should explore, from a policy viewpoint, how we deal with that. And Supervisor Nelson has many times brought up the fact that we ought to be looking, when we're looking at transportation, we ought to be looking at where people go. And he's put it in terms of where people work, but certainly where people study and go to school is a big part of that picture. So I think it's a worthy discussion to have at our retreat. I would certainly encourage that. Thank you.
And I think we ought to include in their private schools. Yes, sir.
Dr. Burke, we were doing some studies on this as a big 710 study for the entire San Gabriel Valley, and I asked specifically to assess the colleges and universities, and the ones that were accredited alone were over 250,000 in just the San Gabriel Valley. And that didn't include, at my day job at the Attorney General's office, we regulate a lot of the Bureau of Post-Secondary Education schools, massage, people like this. There was another couple 100,000 there that aren't even part of the accredited: Rio Hondo, Citrus, Azusa Pacific, Cal Poly Pomona, Mount Sac, said 60,000, East LA College, Cal State LA. It's dramatic, the hundreds of thousands of students and teachers. And then, you know, you open a paper on a Sunday. I've really studied this close. And you look at those colleges, like the Claremont College, they've got museums. Cal Poly just put a brewery in there. They've got clubs. They've got a poetry class. You've got what they call, the experts in planning call trip generation. The trip generation back and forth from those universities and colleges, as the supervisor you said, is unbelievable. Barry, I may not be able to make it Friday because I have a hearing. Can you put that on a Thursday at the possible? If everybody else would agree to it, I have a hearing on Friday. Okay, well, whatever. I'll just.
As I was just discussing with Mayor Yates, there's a lot of ideas out there that can be applied to these various kind of problems. So we ought to be taking a look at those. Okay, we need is there any further comments by any board members? Then do we need a motion on this item? Okay, I will accept the motion.
So moved. Were you taking up both items or just the one?
So, this is item 31 only.
I'll
and
move
it's
approval of item 31.
A second.
Any opposition? Hearing none, That item is approved. We will now be taking a presentation on item 32.
Dr. Burke, staff is waiving its presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions on this
Okay,
item.
with Scott, I'm struggling, is it Briasco? Pretty close? In the ballpark?
Good morning. I'm Scott Briasco. I'm the Electric Transportation Program Manager for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and just here this morning to indicate that we are very supportive and appreciate the district's efforts in developing the charging station protocol that's in front of you today. We believe that it provides a real incentive for businesses to install electric vehicle charging stations, and this will mean more zero-emission vehicle miles traveled and obviously air quality improvements in the basin. And we think it's really important to keep the momentum going forward to get more electric vehicles out on the street and here in the South Coast Basin. So just want to say thank you and appreciate all the hard work that the staff's done on this protocol.
More charging stations.
More charging stations, you bet.
More charging.
So, and it fits in nicely with the program that we have at DWP, where we offer rebates to residential and commercial customers that install charging stations. So there's a great synergy between the two programs.
Thank you so much for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're cracking the Edison nut here because finally they're doing something, participating in charging stations. When this first came up, I almost fainted.
I'll take a motion on 32.
Approval of staff's recommendation to, 1, certify the final environmental assessment, and number 2, adopt Rule 2202 emission reduction quantification protocol for electric vehicle charging station projects.
Second.
Okay. Any opposition to this item? Hearing none. Dr. Williams, do you have any closing comments? Oh, no.
Dr. Tom Williams, also with the No 710 Action Committee. We've dealt with this myself, SR 710. I've only dealt with it since 1992. We're trying to stop it completely now. We're looking at the environmental impact report, and like before, for us in El Sereno, it's an environmental justice issue. People in Pasadena will get 2 alternative sites for venting the air pollution from the tunnels. 40,000 trucks a day. You want to talk about PM1 and ultrafines? It'll be a good source of cleaning effectiveness. I don't know. But down in El Sereno, we only get 1 alternative site for venting 40,000 trucks a day. We're quite concerned about that. But Caltrans and MTA have an established policy. In the past, we took them to court regarding environmental justice before, back in the 90s. They've done the same thing on the light rail transit. In the southern half of the alternative, it's all elevated. And a lot of shops are going to be affected if that was the case. In the northern half, it's all tunneled. What's the difference? Is it a policy of Caltrans and MTA to mess with the low-income areas in preference to the high-income areas? We're concerned. And one of the issues is number of vent stacks. Oh, by the way, in one meeting, they said, we'll meet the ambient air quality requirements. Same as now. Well, they can't do it. Except that, well, if you disperse it over a large enough area, maybe Alhambra will get some increase, maybe not. But the whole thing is, it's in your office now, SR 710. And how will you deal with it? And what comments will the AQMD provide? So right now, we don't even know when it will be certified and who will be actually certifying it. California Transportation Commission, we don't know. Maybe the governor will have to do it. But it will be in the public focus throughout 2016 and right up to November. Thank you.
That is all the cards I had for public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who desired to make public comment? Seeing none, we have no board member travel. Conflicts of interest disclosures? How about closed session, Mr. Weiss?
Thank you, Dr. Burke. It is necessary for the board to recess closed session pursuant to the Government Code Section 54956.9A and 54956.9D1 to confer with its counsel regarding pending litigation, which has been initiated formally, into which the SCAQMD is a party. The actions are People of the State of California, ex rel. SCAQMD versus Exide Technologies, Los Angeles Superior Court case number BC 533528. In the matter of SCAQMD versus Exide Technologies, Inc., SCAQMD Hearing Board case number 3151-29, order for abatement. Exide Technologies, Inc., petition for variance. SCAQMD Hearing Board case number 3151-31, In re Exide Technologies, Inc., U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the District of Columbia, case number 13-11482, parens KJC, close parens, bankruptcy case. It is also necessary for the board to recess closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9A and 54956.9D4 to consider initiation of litigation in one case. A report of the reportable actions taken in closed session will be filed with the clerk of the board and made available to the public upon request. The meeting is adjourned.